All right, the orders of the day call for us to begin. Welcome to part 3 of what is classical Lutheran education. I'm Paul Cain from Sheridan, Wyoming. I'm a pastor, I'm a headmaster, I'm a lifelong student. The final part of this 3-part session will be focusing on putting into practice Lutheran education, home, parish, school. How do you make the transition to classical? How do we decide what to teach? How do we develop self-motivated learners who find joy in learning? I said that last year, even before we knew what the LCMS convention theme was. What does chapel look like, and how does it all come together? I'm not the first to give a presentation like this, so if you request the PowerPoint slides, you can see those on whose shoulders I stand. Where do we go from here? First, teach what you know. Yes, you may need to learn more for the sake of covering what your school needs to cover, what your homeschool needs to cover. So always be learning yourself, then teach that. Become or remain a lifelong learner as a classical Lutheran educator. I would encourage you to visit a classical Lutheran school. Now that might mean some planning. It might mean rescheduling or rehoming a planned family vacation, but it's worth the trip. Even with our faculty, with our school, it's been around since 2003, we receive visitors from other schools, homeschool families as well, and we send our faculty on visits to neighboring schools. Our nearest ones to the north and to the south are 2 hours away. Wyoming being next to Montana with sister schools is helpful too. You can also correspond with administrators and teachers of an accredited school, board members. We can provide you contact information, and even fellow homeschool families. One of the blessings of the internet is we can do this very quickly. I had the opportunity to participate in floor committee weekend in preparation for the LCMS convention. I'm flying from here to Tampa tomorrow, so 2 weeks away from home is rather daunting. But that's July, summers in the Missouri Synod. At floor committee weekend, I was assigned a roommate that, well, I didn't know who it was going to be. It ended up being one of our international missionaries. And he said, at our new Lutheran seminary in the Dominican Republic, we also train teachers. We have students, future teachers and future pastors from 14 countries, and we need faithful teacher resources. Well, that got me thinking. We have the marks of a classical Lutheran school. We have the marks of a classical Lutheran educator, in addition to all of the other marks you heard about from Dr. Jackie Veith. We have essays explaining what classical Lutheran education is. So while she was visiting family in Australia, she began the translation process into Spanish, and we've already sent them, with me as a mediator in Wyoming, to the DR. That is an exciting collaboration that just hit us out of the blue. So we want to make the most of that. Consider we've got an old-fashioned Yahoo email list for homeschool families, for administrators, for teachers, though the latter two are less active than the homeschool group. We do have Facebook groups. Think about CCLE school accreditation. It does not have to be scary. I have survived not just once, but twice. We were renewed last year. I've been on visitation teams. Both can be a very rigorous and emotional experience, but you can do this. And you have encouragers and coaches like myself and other folks. Also, pursue your own certification. We have educator certification and administrator certification. To date, there are 7 on planet Earth. Now, one of the teachers is in Australia, which is awesome. That's how I lost my internet Latin teacher. She moved to Australia. But we have 2 certified administrators with a third in the works. We have 5 certified teachers with others in the works. Had a conversation with one of our teachers. She's in the trenches. She's been teaching at one school alone for over 16 years, plus her classical internship before that. And after a conversation, she realized, I'm halfway done? I thought I was nowhere near to beginning. So we hope to certify her in the next 12 months. Yes, how do you do that? First, go to ccle.org. There are pull-down menus up at the top, and look for the marks of a classical Lutheran school, the marks of a classical Lutheran educator. There are some other marks we need to get up there when I have some free time. We're a wonderful volunteer organization, but that does mean that some things do get delayed because of there are links to tell you how to get started. You bet. How do I teach? Please make your learning goals for yourself and for your students measurable, achievable, and practical. Tell yourself and your students what your outcomes and objectives are. Have high expectations for your learners, including yourself. I'd recommend having a 12K focus instead of a K-12 focus. This is part of how I would work to prevent getting behind. This is one of the recommendations from the book that Dr. Evans co-wrote. But think about Dr. Luther's own example when you get behind. Think about how Dr. Luther was so under the law, especially when it came to praying the daily office, 7 times a day. And remember, matins used to be at 2 a.m. because they had first sleep and second sleep. Getting this one sleep period of 8 hours uninterrupted is modern and unrealistic according to our bodies. But they would get up in the middle of the night and pray, which makes a lot of sense. He realized that at one point he was so far behind on praying the daily office. He'd missed 8 services a day for a matter of years doing Reformation-y things. He absolved himself and then moved on. We sometimes need to take Pastor Heine's advice of figuring out what in all that could be taught should be taught. We also need to maybe zoom in a little bit more closely too of the things that you have not taught that you need to teach, which is of the highest quality, the highest benefit for your students, for their lives. So you are forgiven in Christ if you get behind. Parents might not be as understanding as your administrator may be, but we want to set you up for success, not failure. And sometimes we just have to say, you know, all of Scripture is good, but let's focus on this over another thing. We can talk more about that later too. If you plot out where you want to go with the students, yeah, it makes it easier to subdivide and is actually a very practical thing when you're filling out your school accreditation paperwork. You'll need a scope and sequence or a curriculum map. There are several different ways you can submit that part of what your school says it does, and then do it, or adjust what you say you're going to do to something you can do. That is classical and Lutheran. Tell your students what they're supposed to be learning and why. The why question does come up. I like answering that question. True liberal arts education teaches not only the how and the what, but also the why and the wherefore. And I like to alternately translate liberal arts. Because you say liberal arts in America today, most people are going to focus on one word in particular, liberal. We're talking about freedom, the arts of a free person, the arts of freedom. Emphasize good mental habits. Mastering content is certainly fine outward training, to borrow a phrase from Dr. Luther, but one is truly well prepared if they have good study skills, sorry for the typo, and mental habits. Mastering content is very popular, especially with the Suzuki music method, which I've attempted to teach on guitar. But at some point, you do need to move on to other material. Education is not always about test taking. Think about how we've been conditioned over many generations now. Dorothy Sayers in The Lost Tools of Learning, one of our favorites, stresses the difference between subject matter and tools of learning. Aristotle makes that same distinction. When you buy books by classical authors, might I make a recommendation? Get Loeb volumes. You'll have the Greek or the Latin on one side and the English on the other. It's a little bit more of an investment, but also let me alert you to a website called Loebulus, L-O-E-B, and then add the suffix there. So many of the original Loeb volumes have entered the public domain. You can download what would cost you on Amazon new $3,000 to $4,000 as PDFs. Yes, you'd be looking at screens, but think about all the money you've saved and what kind of a library you can carry around on a Kindle, an iPad, or a laptop. How would I recommend taking assessments? Our school inherited a tradition of Friday assessments, weekly, which provides a pattern, and that way students can mentally prepare as they put their dress uniform on Friday mornings. They can pre-take a spelling test on Thursday. If they get a perfect score, they test out. They don't have to take that one on Friday. This comes from the Pastor Heine era, which we borrowed from Mount Hope Lutheran School. When it comes to other assessments, this has been a good focus for us as a school. We used to do annual administration of Stanford until we heard that it was being discontinued, which they changed their mind. We switched over to Iowa. I administer those myself for our student body, and we invite homeschool families and especially families in the parish to take those tests with us. That allowed us to purchase a whole set of Iowas over the years. I would also encourage administrators to do assessments of their faculty members. 2 months into the school year, once we found our groove and things are a little less stressful, and sometime before the last 2 months of the school year when everybody's stressed again, there's a new assessment tool that we need to put up on ccle.org, an assessment of administrators. So I'll give you a little disclosure. When I submitted my administrator, I was approved as of this conference, but one of my recommendations is to have an external assessment of me as administrator by another classical Lutheran administrator in our district, which allows that document to spread around. So we'll get that online as well. So we realize that grammar, dialectic, rhetoric are developmental stages, as Sayers notes, but the educator always has those as pedagogical tools as well as content areas. Don't ever forget that. Grammar stage emphasizes knowledge acquisition, mastery of content, memorization, repetition. Dialectical stage, when students begin to develop cognitively such that they are capable of abstraction. The focus shifts to cultivation of mental habits. There's a different skill set there. Much of what we offer at every CCLE is grammar directed because of our audience. Homeschool parents, teachers of grammar schools. We don't have as many upper grades beyond 6th grade. So if you have that joy of offering grades above 5th, that means we need to help equip you differently. Dialectic and rhetoric, as well as grammar subjects, may be taught in parallel in this way. This comes from Dr. Tallman's experience. Lay it down a little theory, give some nuts and bolts, have them practice what they've learned. Repeat that, adding new theoretical insights, dispensing new skills, raising the bar, and then another graded assessment for the sake of praxis. We are not testing just for the sake of having more things in the parent folder to take home, more things to show off at an end-of-year academic showcase. We're not assigning homework that teachers are unwilling to grade themselves. How about that? While acquiring the habits of wisdom and eloquence, revisit the concepts. So in the case of rhetoric, which I found was a growth area for me, I asked Dr. Tallman for a course of study. After 2 years, I'm only a fifth of the way through it. I keep finding more goodies. In the case of rhetoric, you have the 5 classical canons, the 3 modes of artistic proof, ethos, pathos, logos, figures of speech, common material fallacies, before the students are ready for the next big thing. As a pastor, I have found classical rhetoric as a wonderful tool for preaching. I learned how to preach without a manuscript. You want scary? That's scary. It took 15 years of doing shut-in visits, sermons, hospital visits without a manuscript to encourage me to do that. We have daily chapel now, and preaching all the way through the lectionary, more on that later, really helps with preaching. And then just not having enough time to write a Wednesday evening Advent midweek sermon, I opened up the Lutheran Study Bible, set it in the pulpit, had a post-it note outline, and let's go. My new project related to preaching and rhetoric, which this could help you if you're brave enough to record yourself in the classroom, teaching whatever subject you want. Get a transcription of your audio. Treat that as a manuscript and see what you can learn going back to a manuscript. It might help you tighten things up. Much, not merely more. Multum non multa. A motto for classical education and life. You cannot teach everything, yet there's always something you want to add. And our school board finally let us add 20 minutes back to the school day that a previous board took out years ago. Deep learning takes time and must be circumscribed, paced. Quality of learning opportunities, priority over quantity. Love of learning will not result from a too rigorous curriculum. We do want high standards. We do not want impossible ones. You've taught. You've met unrealistic expectations before, whether from an administrator or a coworker or yourself. Those are the worst. Connect concepts to one another. This is one of the best parts of classical. So let's talk chapel. This is my favorite. Here you see the first notes of A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. Do note how high the original melody was, the rhythmic one. That's an E, people. I'm a bass. So chapel, who? Your pastor. I'll insist, have chapel led by your pastor with everybody there. Headmaster, if it's a different person, all teachers, all staff, all students, guests from the congregation, guest homeschool families, parents too. This is for everybody. Where? Ideally in your church, the nave, that room used for Sunday mornings. Sit in the pews. Have pastor use the chancel just like he's used to. Let's celebrate your pastor's strengths. Take the opportunity to teach about vestments, paraments, and liturgical furniture. You don't have to do it all at once. You can gradually introduce things, but Don't be afraid of that. What do? The grammar of the Christian faith. One of our honorees this conference was Betty Garwood. At CCLE 5, 2003, she taught a drawing with children class. I can't draw. I can barely write without typing. I can sign my name, though. I like all caps. She taught me how to draw a bear using the grammar of art. There are circles, there are curved lines, there are ovals, there are straight lines, there are bent lines. You look at something, you reproduce it with your own hand, and education finally made sense. Why did I have to take a classics course and a Shakespeare course as electives at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the late 90s, while the history of pre-modern Japan counted for 5 requirements? Use the historic liturgy of the church. I'm not kidding. Imagine Baptist children at a Lutheran school singing in Latin to happy Roman Catholic ladies in a nursing home, and then asking their worship pastor in Sheridan, Wyoming, for matins. I love true stories. Faithful hymnody and song from every time and place. This is an apologetic way to explain what we do at a Lutheran chapel. Has to pass LCMS doctrinal review. There's some good stuff in there. Lutheran Service Book, Luther's Small Catechism. Why? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, this is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Ephesians 6. Pastors, just one suggestion for you. Consider adding that to the Ephesians 5 reading the next time you do a wedding. We are partners with parents in catechesis. We may have more experience in teaching children, but they are their own children's first teachers. It's a very different philosophy than you'd find in some private and most public systems. When? Often. We do it daily. For 8 years before Pastor Castellero arrived, we did 4 days a week. Add in the county jail services, the nursing home services, the Wednesday night we do weekly. I was averaging a service a day. Awesome. If you plan your shut-in visits right, you can commune every day. But what if you only have weekly chapel now? I thank the Lord you have chapel. But a public school curriculum plus chapel and a mention of Jesus once in a while in the classroom does not a classical Lutheran school make. 20 to 30 minutes is possible. Are the first couple of weeks going to be a little rough? Yes. But after several years, the students will show by their behavior and their memorization how the new students, young or transfers, are given to behave. How? That's what this particular portion covers. Here's a model from the Wyoming district. This actually comes from next year's host congregation in school. They pray matins every day, except Wednesday, where they have Divine Service 3, good old page 15. It is an opportunity to work toward an all LCMS faculty in communion fellowship with one another and occasions for joy, right? Yes. They use different hymns every day. Our model is this, and it's been modified. If you heard this presentation last year, on Monday, we used to do morning prayer. We've now swapped with we swap back and forth on matins. We're actually thinking of doing one of our matins with the new Matthew Carver hymnal, yet to be published, in Latin. Same music that you already know from Matins, but in Latin. We preach on the Old Testament lesson or reading from Acts during certain years. I teach the Venite first and have optional hymn options for canticles. Or you could resurrect that Psalm 100 Anglican chant setting from the back of TLH. Use the Benedictus, it's right there in morning prayer, and introduce the MLGS Hymn of the Week. I use call and response. Tuesday, we used to do responsive prayer. We've now moved that. It's an opportunity to use the Apostles' Creed and Lord's Prayer, one of several. We include the appointed Psalm of the week and a sermon on the epistle lesson, or Revelation if you're in that year of the 3-year. Versicles and responses, what are they? They're quoted from Scripture most of the time. Wednesday, Matins, a sermon on the Holy Gospel. There, I teach the Venite first. The Te Deum is there with the Benedictus for Advent and Lent. If you have not used the Benedictus before because you're afraid of it, Lutheran Service Book at least lowered it 2 whole steps. Altos and basses can sing it now. On Thursday, this is Pastor Castellero's day, service of prayer and preaching. Yes, it's new, but it's what I inherited when I showed up in Sheridan, and it works well in nursing homes. It works well in county jails, too. Both canticles have repetitive refrains. A catechetical sermon on the memory work for the week. You've got the catechism, 10 Commandments, Creed, and Lord's Prayer just baked right in, as well as Luther's own prayers. Friday afternoon, we have chapel. All the others are first thing in the morning. We used to do evening prayer on Thursday afternoon when I was soloing it. So we would pray for their test day and pray for my day off, that it would be a good test day and a good day off. But with the blessing of a second pastor who is a classroom teacher, it's a great opportunity here. You could also consider Vespers or Compline. Which lectionary? Well, this is strangely controversial in LCMS circles. So, allow me to explain a way that I've found a way to make everybody mad. I change lectionaries every 3 years. I do the 3-year for 3 years, and then I do the 1-year for 3 years. I've always been out of sync with somebody in my own district, in my own circuit. Figured I'm not going to please everybody, so I'm going to do what works for me. But take a look at this. There are 2 other options you could consider for chapel. There's the Treasury of Daily Prayer, daily lectionary. It's fleshed out from Lutheran Service Book. There's an app for that, yes, that doesn't send your data to the Russians. It's called Pray Now, and it is one of the laziest devotional practices you could ever do. Can you touch a button on your tablet or smartphone? Yes? Then Pray Now, the Treasury of Daily Prayer app, opens the book up to the right day using your phone's calendar. It's awesome. Or you could consider the daily lectionary for schools, designed for schools by Concordia Catechetical Academy. That's a great way to get started with their stuff. Let me say this about a Lutheran theology of worship. It sounds strange if you have an American evangelical background. It sounds strange if you have a Roman Catholic background. And it begins with God. Divine service is the divine serving us, Gottesdienst. And it is how we learn to speak. So our Lord speaks first, we repeat back to him, just as children learn how to talk. How many times have you seen your own child, your own short relative, or one of your students pick up a block and start talking on the phone like you? Wow. The rhythm of our worship is from him to us and then from us back to him. The focus on worthship, giving glory to someone who is worthy of it, is using Webster's dictionary to define what we do as Christians. If we allow Scripture to define how worship works, all we can offer is a pitifully thank you for all of God's great gifts to us in Christ. At a future CCLE, I hope to offer a Lutheran Theology of Worship course for Lutheran educators. This is all the best part of Lutheran Worship, the hymnal, 1982, written by Dr. Nagel. So, fun to quote him. So far, let's review what we've talked about. Start somewhere. That's better than feeling overwhelmed. I get feeling overwhelmed. Remember, I went to my first one of these in 2003. I didn't get to go to another until I was actually a headmaster. And because of reading the recommended books I got in 2003 through 2009, I almost felt competent to show up as a headmaster and follow my predecessor there. You can always improve your content. Always. You can have chapel more often. Visit partner schools, sister schools, copy them. Just rip them off with their permission. I mean, we'll give it. And model. Model what you do when you have guests. Teach what you know, learn more, and teach our trilogy, Bible, Catechism, Hymnal, and keep at it. It is hard work. You will see a great emphasis of Latin in CCLE. Pastor Castellero now knows Latin better than I do. I know liturgical Latin better than other kinds of Latin. If you ask me what the Latin word for pomegranate is right now, I'm not going to be able to tell you. But keeping Latin in Lutheranism is us. It's in the Lutheran confessions. We retain the Latin language on account of those who are learning and understand Latin. Sound like anybody, you know? And we mingle with it German hymns, there's the chorales, in order that the people also may have something to learn, and by which faith and fear may be called forth. This custom has always existed in the churches. Apology. So how do you add Latin to chapel? This was one of the intimidating things when I showed up 10 years ago. Classroom and chapel directions. Sit, stand, pray. Then you can end up with the greetings of the teacher. Learn to sing the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, in Latin. This is a fun thing to do. This will also give your pastor an excuse to buy a triglata. See, got your back, brothers. Work toward adding some liturgy and hymns in Latin. You can explain who Bing Crosby is when you teach them Hodeste Fideles, right? It sounds awesome. Awesome. One of my favorites, though the translator in 1830 has the last name, unfortunately, of Buttman. I don't print that in the book for the kids. It just wouldn't work. Arx firma Deus noster est. Anybody? Anybody? A mighty fortress in Latin. You have Matthew Carver's in-print hardcover, the Latin hymns of the Lutheran Church. It's got them both. You've got the Latin in Gregorian chant, and you've got English in what you're used to. There's also a forthcoming book that I just can't wait to be in print. I'm advocating for a green cover so it'll match the Vulgata that one of our 6th graders brings to church with her. Just the last 2 Sundays, she's sitting there in the pew with her Latin Bible, reading the Latin of the readings while we're reading the readings up front. Okay, there are things I can't do, so there are things you can't do. So what? Just, we can work on that. I have felt behind in Latin. I have felt behind in my readings. Well, we prioritize what's important to us. So it's an opportunity to redo my schedule. And not being in session in school means other things come to the fore. Yeah. Yes. So Arx Firma, email me. I'll take care of you there. Think about what your goal is as an educator. Complete your own education. That may or may not mean a degree. I began reviewing books as worship chairman of the Wyoming district, 12, 13 years ago? That's a lot of books for free. I've found that people in Sheridan, Wyoming are very generous in donating books to the public library after they've been gently used. Even Longmire books. He's the fictional sheriff from a fictional county that also debuted on A&E and Netflix. There are lots of ways to find free reading, and the Lobolus, the PDFs, I don't know if I'll ever be able to finish those. Teach your own children. Even if they go to a school, remember to teach your own children. It's such a joy to teach our nephews and our niece when they come to visit, to be their baptismal sponsors, to bless them with cool stuff at their confirmations. You may have a goal to start a school from scratch. One of our evening meal times, that was my conversation with the brother pastor sitting right next to me. Well, what do we do? How about Jesus, letters, and numbers? Start with the basics. Give them Jesus. Focus on language arts, phonics, some Latin, and math. Take what you have in Saxon and teach it classically. The scripts aren't, but work on that. Do a survey of the folks who are interested in a small school or a homeschool co-op. Figure out the subjects that they feel competent to teach in and teach those. You might have a French class. You might decide that Koine, New Testament Greek, would be a great way to get your winkle full of pastors involved in your school instead of Latin. It's all right. You may be wanting to expand your school. Expect to spend a lot of time on your knees. It's often a struggle to maintain a congregation or a school as is. You may wish to transition your school to classical, and there, start somewhere. But there are some tips that we have coming up here. Being just as good as the other educational options in town is not enough. Never let you hear of us that we're just marking time until retirement. We should be better. Mere Christianity is not adequate here. This is the advice I heard from some folks in Idaho wanting to start a classical Lutheran school. They toured LCMS schools. They toured classical LCMS schools. They toured other classical schools, and they were horrified at some of the compromises being made. The utter confusion of parents and students when teachers were teaching against one another. That's not a good way to run a railroad. Trying to please everyone actually pleases no one. We had visitors that are considering relocating. They are Calvinists. They wanted to know if they could join the congregation and retain what they believe. Well, we want as much doctrinal unity as possible in the Missouri Synod. So that's not exactly going to work. But would they be welcome at our school? Yes. We'll give you authentic Lutheranism. And by being authentic, we are faithful to the scriptures because we have to prove everything from the scriptures. And even that, as a description of what we do when we teach theology, is appealing to Seventh-day Adventists. Your mileage may vary, but they love Luther. They sing canticles. It's in their hymnal. And they love the law, of course. Focus on Lutheran Christian identity. In our region, there's a long-time Lutheran school. I can't say if they started classical-ish back in the day, but they became like a typical Lutheran school over time. When they had a new classical Lutheran school open in the same community, it remarkably improved that original school's Lutheran identity. Thanks be to God. So what if you're starting from scratch? Talk to connections within the district. You may have a district education exec who has a cubicle at the district office. I don't have a cubicle. I also have 2 day jobs, pastor and headmaster. But it's an opportunity to see what resources are available in your own district. Visit a school, I've said that before. LCMS School Ministry has Genesis consultants. They tell you about how to start a school. Every then CCLE board member about 3 years ago went through the training. It's a bit dated. It's heavily reliant on LCEF demographic data, unless we found out as a board, you're wanting to start a classical school. And then the presenter that they flew into St. Louis for us from where he teaches now said, oh, if you want a classical school, you're going to have enough passionate people, you can just go for it. It doesn't matter what the demographics say. Talk with us, CCLE representatives, board members, former board members. We've got 5 former board members in attendance in addition to the current board. That's awesome. Work toward congregational consensus. It's tempting to pull the pin too early. At some point, you do need to move forward, but build what consensus you can early, because you don't want to be a church with a school. You want to be a church with a school. You may wish to form partnerships within the circuit. An association school is a very special kind of animal. Make sure that the responsibilities and benefits are clearly delineated. We had an association school in our region close when the assumption was we have all the pastors. In reality, it became we don't have one. Think about a preschool. Mount Hope Casper began with a preschool. Martin Luther Grammar School has yet to have a preschool. Expanding. You could consider adding a preschool to your kindergarten. We have on occasion had half-day kindergarten to supplement full-day kindergarten. There's the ancient goal of adding a grade per year. It's a great goal until you start losing students at the top end, which is personally discouraging, but still keep with it. You might need to wait every other year. We were advised students, then staff, then structures, not the if you build it, they will come model. Save that one for baseball. Build from the lower grades up. We've had 2 Christian schools in Sheridan, Wyoming close before we were born. The problems were financial, actually almost too much money. One of them was they stopped recruiting at lower grades in order to expand into upper grades. Really backfired. Financial infrastructure, you do have to talk about it. And then you can expand by inviting presentations, coming to conferences like this, and doing your own continuing education. It doesn't always have to be the numbers. We can grow in the Word of God even if we're not growing in numbers. Let me pause right here. Have I generated any additional questions? Also, let me know how we can encourage you. Again, with the overwhelming stuff. Martin Luther Grammar School is classical. We use the word. Even though the public school uses the word classic kindergarten for, let's see, there was a sitcom where one of the lead characters went to super kindergarten because he didn't pass the first time through. We've tried to catechize because they wouldn't change their terminology. We are Christian. We are Lutheran. We are rigorous. And we could say it this way too. Classical education teaches the next generation what most people thought or think we're already teaching them in a Lutheran Christian school. We're doing what people often assume without better knowledge. Classical education supplies the furniture of the mind, quoting Tallman here, needed to embrace a faith worldview grounded in, this is most certainly true, a sacramental Christian viewpoint, and faith grounded in the Lutheran confessions. You will hear classical education from a Lutheran standpoint involves vocation and baptism. This is the life of the baptized. Classical ed is not a passing fad, but a return to our roots. If some in our synod are willing to embrace us and partner with us because we're the next cool thing in their determination, okay, but hear us out on what we're about. Classical ed in Lutheran school is more than just an appeal to a niche market to survive. But I do know of some schools that are unwilling to consider it, even though they're on the doorstep of closure. Classical Lutheran education is an opportunity to believe, teach, and confess who we are as Lutheran Christians. So how about transition? Again, start somewhere. Get the pastor, pastors, headmaster, board, faculty, parents, and congregation on board. Start somewhere. You might need to explain what we're all about. Introduce the marks of a classical Lutheran school. It's a free document. The marks of a classical Lutheran educator. There's some good things in there that might open some eyes. We have other essays that you can download and freely share. We have over 170 videos on YouTube. I uploaded them myself. Many of them are converted audio files, as I mentioned one of the previous days. As of this conference, we're going to unembargo everything from last year. There's a couple of sessions that we don't record every year by request, but you will be able to watch virtually everything from last year. We've got something from almost every year, but some files did degrade, either on magnetic tape or on one of my hard drives a few dozen computers ago. We will make available to you this trilogy of sessions for you to share with who you want to share it with. We'll come visit you too. Embrace our Lutheran identity and Lutheran confession of the Christian faith. Have chapel more often. That can be one of the most difficult things, just to find time in the schedule. Have you ever tried looking at old school schedules, your place and others? Have you looked at historic Lutheran school schedules back when this institution lived at Addison? Oh, that's a trip. Start with math and language arts. Connect with sister schools. Continuing ed for faculty, board, headmaster, and parents. I found that in Wyoming, if you write up the application right, you can get State of Wyoming teacher certificate renewal credits for fall teacher conference and even in-house catechesis. It's possible. Laws in Nebraska are more draconian. I pray for you a lot. Have a culture of continual improvement. Add classical content to Lutheran materials and Lutheran content to classical materials. We don't have everything that we want published by our LCMS publisher in St. Louis. You are going to find ways to source additional materials, like lutheranhomeschool.com. So go there. There's more things that will be added as we go through. You can also request on your feedback for this conference what you want to hear next time, what you want to see published by CCLE. We are hoping to turn this trilogy into the next Classical Lutheran Education Journal, which means I need to get a transcript of what I just said. That could turn into a book. That's all right. And we're not about making money. Whatever profit we get from Amazon goes right back into CCLE to support conferences and grants and different things. And some stuff is just plain free, which is awesome. But we strangely found out that if you put it in a paperback book and charge money for it, people will read it more than the PDFs of the journal. But then you have something permanent, and I like hardcovers. Please continue the conversation. I answer this email address too, webmaster@ccle.org. There's lots of resources on the website, ccle.org. We are always open to learning ourselves and offering what is requested. We wish to offer more on dialectic, logic, and rhetoric. We wish to offer more on the classical quadrivium as well as its modern classical equivalents. All right, that's what I have for you today. Other questions, please keep it coming. I can give you some direction. So the question was, what was my reading list? I began with a Veritas Press catalog in 2003. I read through that. It is not all Lutheran because it is not a Lutheran outfit. There's a few things to note. You will see some Lutheran books in there. As a pastor, as a trained Lutheran educator, someone catechized in the faith, you will see books you've never heard of before. And if you do a little research on the authors and titles, you'll find out, oh, this is Calvinist. Well, what's the Lutheran equivalent for this? So instead of the Westminster Confession of Faith, you can take some part of the Book of Concord. You can supplement for some of the optional reading in junior high and high school levels, the spirituality of the cross. You can add dying to live. There's lots of different things that we have in our seminary libraries that we can supplement with there. If we only circle the wagons and only read Lutheran stuff, then I think we hobble ourselves in not being able to defend what we believe, teach, and confess. So if we can expose ourselves and our young people to things in a controlled environment, we can show them how we react to things, how we answer things, even the apologetics that we heard in the plenary this morning from Dr. Manouche on how to answer those scientism philosophical things. A couple other things. In their history cards, there's one where they teach the 10 Commandments. You'll need to substitute our numbering. But it is a way to explain the 3 different numbering systems of the 10 Commandments. If you add in the Jewish one, where their first of 10 words is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Genetically, we can't say that. So their second commandment becomes, you shall have no other gods in my face. And then they end up doing the Calvinist thing of having one covet commandment. Look at some of the other publishers like we had here, Memorial Press. You'll see a lot of CPH things there. We've got our own Cheryl Swope with lots of materials. We need more of our own stuff, and many things are in process. We have yet to arrive. We are further up and further in, but we're not yet there. We've been doing this for 20 years, so not all of us are new. We love having new people. So it's kind of best of both worlds. Does that help as a start? We can also give you specific advice on a one-on-one basis, especially on what you're interested in. I'll tell you what we use, and we heavily adapt things. We have the writing road to reading. We have phonics. We teach phonograms. I still have a cheat sheet when I'm the sub, and I have to write what rule is up there, what pronunciation we're doing, but that is good for me. To actually work through those and practice those myself. It's great for spelling too. You can have as many levels as you want with knights and salamanders and, pick your names creatively, even classically if you want. We supplement with Shirley English. We didn't buy every level, every book. We focus on certain levels and add in what we deem appropriate. We teach in language arts Latin in parallel with English from kindergarten up. I don't believe we're playing with it. I believe we're doing some substantive things that will bear fruit later. Because again, think about the 6th grader I was telling you about. She's smart. Humbling, which is good to have every once in a while. When it comes to language arts, what I love to do is to take the complete sentence, write it up on the board, and then have the kids dissect it with a red marker. Here's the nouns, here's the verbs, divide the complete subject from the complete predicate, and then we had the lesson of compound sentences the last time I taught. The Latin lesson was veni, vidi, vici. I wrote the Latin sentence on the board. We translated it into English. One of the translations was, I came, I saw, I kicked some. I allowed it for the sake of a smile. And then we tried to mark up the Latin sentence like you would do in Shirley, right? But Pastor Cain, in order to divide the complete subject from the complete predicate, you have to chop words in half. Yeah, you do. See, that integrating subjects, that is fun. For math, we use Saxon. We skip kindergarten. We skip 4th grade. We sometimes skip 6, 7. And for Algebra 1, Jacobs. For geometry, Jacobs. Most of these I had myself in a public school in Nebraska. Then they got rid of them, and then they bought them back, since my sister's been teaching at that school. She's in the English side, not the math side. You will note that you will need to classical up some of the scripts as you figure out your own. Other schools do pretty well with Singapore math. But we've yet to have a classical Lutheran math program developed. Yeah. All right. We are ready for itinerarium. Hope to see you there and next year.